straight away, like, I feel strangely nervous about this. Like, it's weird sitting in your own bedroom feeling nervous, but I think it's because it's such a personal issue, you know. And I haven't actually told my story for a while. So it's a real privilege. Thank you for having me here. So I am 37. I was born in 83, and I was born with hypoplastic left heart and other complications. And so I have a Fontan circulation. That will mean something to any of you out there that also have that. I had my first Fontan procedure when I was 6 years old in Green Lane by Alan Kerr, and then in 2005, when I was 21, I had that converted to the extracardiac Fontan. That was done by Kirsten Nukin. So, and then since then, I've had issues with VT, and I have a defibrillator. I'm on my third defibrillator. Yeah, so that's my cardiac history. So pregnancy, yeah. I think I was always told, mainly by my mother, that I probably couldn't have children. And I think that was precautionary for her, making sure that this little maternal child playing with dolls wasn't going to grow up with this complete belief that I was going to have, you know, 2 or 3 kids, when it may not happen. So I was told initially I couldn't have children, but that changed a bit to I shouldn't have children, which changed again as I got older to, if you are thinking about having a baby, come and see us first, because we want to check everything out and make sure you're going to be safe in the process. So I was, yeah, I think I was 31. I was 31, and I had got married, and my husband and I were, you know, in that position of all of our friends around us were starting to have children. We'd been overseas, we'd just come back from living overseas, and we started thinking about it seriously. And I followed my cardiologist's advice. And the first thing that I did when we started thinking about it seriously was I went and saw them and made an appointment. And they ran a series of tests. So some of those tests were, you know, the usual tests like ECGs and echoes. But then they ran some other tests like liver and kidney function tests to make sure my thyroid was working properly, an exercise tolerance test, and just to, you know, gauge my general health. And at that point in time, I was probably in the best cardiac health that I'd ever been in. So the advice was, if you're going to do it, if you really have to, do it now. Don't just wait, because right now you're in good health, but we don't know what will happen in like a month or 6 months. But that didn't solve our query, because my husband and I were still feeling really cautious about it. So some of the questions that were running through our heads that we discussed a lot were, I wrote them down so I wouldn't forget them. If I was to get pregnant, would the baby survive a pregnancy? Would my body be able to care for a baby full term? And, you know, that's really emotional, because if it didn't, then what? What sorts of decisions were we going to place ourselves under in that instance? Will I survive a pregnancy? That was also unknown. Will I have lasting cardiac complications because I chose to have a pregnancy? We had no guarantee how my health would be long term and what a pregnancy could actually do and how it could affect me. So all of these things were, you know, going through our heads and really making us feel pretty anxious, but we discussed them all with my cardiologist and Annette at the time, who was there, who most of you probably remember and know, and our families and each other. We also did other things, like we went and saw Fertility Plus and talked to them about the opportunity of surrogacy and whether we would be eligible, I guess, for surrogacy and how that would work. We also went and signed up for an information evening at Oranga Tamariki about adoption and how the adoption process works, and both in New Zealand and also overseas adoption. So we really tried to cover our bases in terms of what are the options out there for us before we made the decision to go ahead and try for a baby. And then we did make the decision to go ahead and try for a baby. My understanding, based on other people that I'd talked to that had Fontan circulation and had children, was that I was likely to have a miscarriage or 2 or 3 or 4, because other people that I'd known had to deal with that. And I got really, really lucky and I didn't have one. The first time that I got pregnant, that is now my son who's 4 and dancing in the lounge. So then what? Oh yeah, I'll tell you about this. Okay, so you know, okay, most of you will know that instance where you're about to go on holiday and you realize that you have not picked up your last meds prescription and you're out. No, maybe everyone else is much more organized than me. The things always seem to happen right before you go away. So I found out I was pregnant on the morning of the 28th of December. That is not an ideal time to find out that you're pregnant, because it's in the middle of that Christmas, New Year's break where most of the staff are away and all of that. So I found out that morning and I did what I'd been told by my cardiologist, which was, if you find out you're pregnant, tell your partner, tell your mum and dad or your family, and then tell me straight away. Don't wait, just tell me straight away, because there are things we need to do immediately. And one of those things is come off warfarin, in my case. I think in everyone's case if they're on warfarin, but Stephanie will talk to us about that, I'm sure. So I found out I was pregnant, went to Raglan for our 7-day holiday with our 20-something friends, and contacted my cardiologist. And as it turns out, the person that rang me back straight away was Stephanie. And she was just so calm and so comforting and really explained to me what I needed to do. I think she even got a prescription sent to Raglan for aspirin so that I could come off the warfarin straight away, and just really reassured me that as soon as I got back to Auckland, I'd come in, I'd see them, and we'd work out a plan. Yeah, then what? And then for most of my pregnancy, it was a pretty normal pregnancy. I got fluid retention very quickly, but that was expected. I was really tired, but if you don't have a kid and you want to have a nap at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, best nap ever, you know, you could do that. I couldn't do that anymore, but I could then. But mainly it was good. So what they did straight away was they got me set up with the high risk obstetrics team at Auckland Hospital. So I was under my cardiologist, I was under the high risk obstetrics team with a midwife connected to them. And I was being seen by both of these departments, and they were communicating together at the same time. So I really felt very well supported and very cared for, and I would hope that that is the situation that everyone would find themselves in. I think it was lucky for me that I was in Auckland, so getting to all of these extra appointments in these 2 departments was manageable for me. Yeah. So, and everything was pretty smooth sailing until I hit about 20 weeks. And at about 20 weeks, I started feeling some really unusual rhythm problems. And as I've already said, I have a defibrillator. So rhythm issues is something that I have already been dealing with anyway. But this was something new, and it was really intense. And I should have dealt with it immediately, and I didn't deal with it immediately. And 10 days later, and a trip to the Coromandel, and a 24-hour Holter monitor finally, when I returned, found that I was having, I think the Holter monitor picked up like 293 episodes of VT in 24 hours. So I was really not in an ideal state, and they got me straight into hospital, and luckily we managed that with medication. And I think a key point here for me is that when you're vulnerable, it's really important that you're able to put trust in the medical team that are supporting you. And, you know, when you're pregnant, you've got this sense of, I need to look after myself, but I also really need to look after the baby that's inside me. And so anything that I'm putting into my body, I need to be comfortable with it being okay for the baby as well. And when it comes to medications, you know, I don't have the knowledge about whether they are okay or whether they're not okay. And I just had to trust my team. I just had to trust the people around me, the obstetrics team and the cardiologists that were supporting me. And luckily, this medication that they had me on, and they upped it, like, I think it was like the max dose they could at the time. Luckily, that worked. And I didn't have any more of that horrible VT for the remainder of the pregnancy. And really, that was the main glitch. So I'll talk a little bit about, sorry if I'm waffling. Okay, so when you're pregnant, if those of you that have been or know people that have been will know this, you have to work out a birth plan. So my husband and I went to antenatal classes, which were really helpful and really interesting, and you get a lot of information about how to handle a baby and all of that. But what I had to be aware of also with CHD was that there were some things that were not going to be applicable to me. I was not going to be able to expect to have a birth plan where I had a water birth or a home birth, or where I could just say no thank you to an epidural, because it wouldn't have been safe. None of those things would have been safe for me, and therefore they wouldn't have been safe for my baby either. And so when it came to working out a birth plan, it kind of, I felt like a lot of it was out of my hands. And to be honest, that was hard, because I had all my friends around me, you know, that are working out these birth plans with their midwife, just one-on-one, based on their philosophies of what childbirth is. And my procedure was kind of a procedure, not just a birth, was going to be much more medical. And in one way that was really comforting, because I needed to know that I was going to be safe. But in another way, it just kind of took the romance out of, you know, giving birth to a baby, if that is romantic in any way. But I think that was something I really had to get my head around. And I did. It was okay. It was okay. So how it worked out was that there was about 2 or 3 different birth plans, and they were worked out mainly by the obstetrics team, my cardiologists, and the anaesthetists, because they had to be prepared for the option of cesarean, emergency cesarean, and probably you guys know, no anaesthetists want to just emergency put us under into a general anaesthetic. That's not ideal. They want it to be planned. So there was a whole lot of like pages of planning that went into this. And really, I was really thankful that my son ended up, I managed to make it to 36 weeks? 36 weeks. And then he decided it was time to come. So I think we were waiting 1 more week. They were kind of pushing me a week at a time to see how I was coping. And I was having like 2 appointments a week or more at the end to see how I was coping. And I think it was at 37 weeks that they were going to induce me, because of course that would have been full term pretty much anyway. But my son decided to come at 36 weeks. And yeah, and then there was like 24 hours. Yeah, it was about 24 hours of being in labour from when the contractions started. And what have I put down here? I've put down here that the most dramatic part of the actual giving birth process was the 3 hours that it took while I was having contractions to get all the lines in. You know how it is sometimes really impossible for them to get lines in? There was lines in my feet, in the end, in my arm, in my hand. The epidural took like 3 tries and 2 anaesthetists while you were like having contractions. So there was 3 hours of just this really intense, let's try and get her ready, turn off the ICD, 13 people in the room. There's none of this like me, my husband and 1 midwife calming music. That wasn't the situation. It was pretty intense. And then that 3 hours actually made the birth process seem quite manageable. Yeah. That's that. So I was able to get Fen out. Fen is his name. I was able to get him out naturally, but with the help of the ventouse, which was desperately needed because I was totally running out of puff, and he was starting to become a bit distressed. So the ventouse was used, which is the suction cup on the baby's head, if you're not aware of that. And my son was small, so the hardest part would have been that first night. So after I gave birth, I then had quite a lot of bleeding and was taken to theatre for that. And because of my cardiac history, I then had to be in the cardiac high dependency ward for that night. And Fen, who had been born at, what was he, 2.3 kgs, so he was a pretty small little guy, and he was like 4 weeks early, so he hadn't put on that bulk yet. He was just skin and bones, really. He had to be taken to NICU. I was in cardiac HDU, he was in NICU. My husband was in a room somewhere else that they'd let him sleep in. And so the 3 of us for that first night were separated, and I was in a huge amount of pain because of that. And that was really hard. That first night was really hard. And it just had to be that way. It was not, there was no option. And then Fen remained in NICU for 11 nights, and then he came home, and we've got a healthy boy. Yeah, that's it really. But I was meant to say at the beginning, I'm an open book. I'm happy to answer any questions. If you want gory details, I can give you more gory details, I'm sure. Yeah, anything at all, I'm happy to answer. But I also was meant to say at the beginning, this is my story. There is absolutely nothing in what I'm saying to you that is trying to either encourage you or discourage you if you're considering pregnancy. Every single one of our bodies and our physiologies are completely different. And also, I don't know a single person who has had the same pregnancy and childbirth as anyone else, or even the same one themselves. Like every single pregnancy and every single childbirth is different. So I just wouldn't want anybody basing their decision on anything that I've said. I just think it is sometimes helpful to hear a story if it is more relevant to you, I guess. In 2014, I went to the Fontan Education Day, and it was in Melbourne, that one. That was the first one I went to. And there was a woman there that told her story about pregnancy, and she had had miscarriage after miscarriage after miscarriage, and then went through IVF and ended up with a baby. And for some reason, even though her story was really tragic and really hard to hear, she really inspired me. And I think that's kind of what helped me make the decision to give it a go. But in saying that, I'm not saying that I want to inspire anyone. It was important to me to hear her story, so I'm hoping that I can pass that on. That's all. Yeah. So questions, I'm happy to answer.